The Kiffin era has begun. We've got everything you need to know about Lane Kiffin's first few hours in Baton Rouge. It's Locked on LSU. Here we go.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We're free, available wherever you get great podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. And as always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. So thank you sincerely for that. Thank you for helping make the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 podcast network, sports podcast network in the world. Today's episode brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. So the Lane Kiffin era is underway. On Sunday, it became official. Lane Kiffin releasing a statement that he is leaving Ole Miss to accept the LSU job. LSU subsequently announcing that Lane Kiffin has accepted their job. And now Lane Kiffin lands in Baton Rouge and is officially the LSU football coach and is off and running. A few things that I want to touch on here today as we talk about how the day transpired, what staff changes look like, what we know about Lane Kiffin's staff, and then also the roster. As signing day is Wednesday. So it was an eventful day on Sunday that I want to touch on as well. So we'll get to all that here over today's episode. Thank you for hanging out with us. So let's kind of go through the chronology of the day on Sunday. So we all went to bed in the early morning hours of Sunday, late Saturday night into Sunday morning, with the understanding that Ole Miss was going to have a 9 a.m. meeting. And Lane Kiffin was going to address his team. And then after that 9 a.m. meeting, he was going to board a plane to Baton Rouge, at which point he would then be introduced as the LSU coach officially. And then there'd be a press conference on Monday. Well, then we all went to bed weary and sleepy-eyed and woke up Sunday at whatever time we did to realize that 9 a.m. meeting had actually been delayed and pushed back until the afternoon. Now, the initial word that we had where the planes were going to leave Baton Rouge at 11:30 to fly to Oxford. All that got delayed. Everything got pushed back. That team meeting was moved to 1 o'clock. The planes departed Baton Rouge later than anticipated. And I'm trying to get the exact times that they depart. I have all my notes right here anyway. The planes ended up departing Baton Rouge later and landing in Oxford. It was about 1:30. They landed in Oxford at 1:25 is when they departed Baton Rouge, landed in Oxford at 2:10. They collected Kiffin, his wife, Layla, their son, Knox, and then several other staff members that we'll discuss here in a little bit, flew to Baton Rouge to much fanfare and went straight to LSU football operations, which we'll talk about here in a second, how Lane's day went. But Lane was asked actually at the Oxford airport. Marty Smith of ESPN did an incredible job catching up with Lane and covering this entire thing, and spoke to Lane before he got on the plane to Baton Rouge and asked him point blank why he didn't attend the meeting. This is what Lane Kiffin said.
Again, I totally respect Keith's decision.
So that was his decision?
Yeah. He asked me not to come to the meeting and said I couldn't come, but which I totally understand. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. We're trying to find a way, to make this work and coach the team and give the team the best chance to win. But I also, he's got a job to do, and like he said, he has to live here. So, like he said, maybe all the national people understand why he should let me coach, but he has to live here, and it's a little different when you're the AD. So totally respect that. And Keith has been amazing to us over the 6 years.
So Lane said there that Keith Carter was the one who would not let him address his team. Lane Kiffin also released a statement on social media, which read, after a lot of prayer and time spent with family, I made the difficult decision to accept the head coaching position at LSU. I was hoping to complete a historic 6-season run with this year's team by leading Ole Miss through the playoffs, capitalizing on the team's incredible success and their commitment to finishing strong and investing everything into a playoff run with guardrails in place to protect the program if any areas of concern. My request to do so was denied by Keith Carter, despite the team also asking him to allow me to keep coaching them so they could better maintain their high level of performance. Unfortunately, that means Friday's Egg Bowl was my last game coaching the Rebels. While I'm looking forward to a new start with a unique opportunity at LSU, I will forever cherish the incredible 6 years I spent at Ole Miss and will be rooting hard for the team to complete their mission and bring a championship to Oxford. So Lane squarely placing the blame here on Keith Carter for how this all transpired. I don't blame him. I also don't think that's completely genuine. Maybe genuine. My feeling all along with this has been that the two people that could have ended this charade were Lane Kiffin and Keith Carter. At any point, Lane, knowing he was leaving Ole Miss, could have walked away. Didn't, because he wanted to coach his team. Keith Carter at any point could have told Lane Kiffin, this ends today. Didn't, and it created this environment that festered. So there's no great answer to this. But I think Lane Kiffin, in that statement, is trying to make it very clear that he didn't walk away from his team. He was forced away from his team. Now, you can believe what you want, and history will decide. Ultimately, Lane Kiffin walked away, but he wanted to continue coaching his team, and the athletic director told him, no, you're not coaching your team. You're leaving. You can't even address your team. And you and I can have our own opinions about who was right in that situation. I understand Ole Miss not letting Lane Kiffin coach. I do, because I look at it from the perspective of if LSU's head coach decided they were leaving to be the head coach at Alabama in the middle of a playoff run, there's no way I'd want that person on a sideline. And that's not cutting off your nose to spite your face. That's understanding that person, while they're working for for another program, is going to be on your sideline with your team, recruiting your players, recruiting for another team, working for another team. And while that game is happening, the entire broadcast is going to be about that coach coaching another team. It becomes a commercial for your rival. So I get it. I get Keith Carter's decision. I do. I understand Keith Carter's decision to say, you're not coaching our team if you're leaving. I get it. But Keith Carter's timing in this was atrocious because he could have put a stop to this 2 weeks ago during Ole Miss's bye week, but he didn't. He could have made sure Lane Kiffin didn't coach the Egg Bowl, and this could have been done more than a week ago already, but he didn't. And that was weak leadership on Keith Carter's part. Seems like a smart guy. I don't know him. Seems like a smart guy, a nice guy, but a guy that was unable to make a very tough decision as a leader, and as leaders are often called to do. And it led to an uncomfortable situation locally, nationally, and something that really left Ole Miss in a lurch because they also got way behind in the coaching cycle, the coaching carousel. Now, in that interview with Marty Smith, Lane Kiffin was also asked, why are you leaving?
You know, there was something in me. This was really hard. My heart was here. But I just, I talked to some mentors, Coach Carroll, Coach Saban, and especially when Coach Carroll said, man, your dad would tell you to go, man, take the shot. Take the shot. You've accomplished a lot here. I always hated how we only gave 1 year to Tennessee and left. I really hated that feeling of that, even though it was an exciting year. But, I think that we gave a lot to this program and to the city, and some of the most historic wins in this stadium we've ever had, and best regular season in the history of the school. So I feel proud of that part, but it just became time. I talked to God and he told me it's time to take a new step. It's a new chapter.
If you're an everydayer, you heard us earlier in the week when we talked about Lane Kiffin referencing speaking at his dad's funeral, and how only then, when he talked about how difficult it was moving as much as they did as kids, why they did it, but at his dad's funeral, hearing people from all these different places talk about how important his dad meant to him, to them, in all those different spots, it made sense. I told you then, and if you're an everydayer, you heard the episode. If you missed it, you can go check it out. But it was very apparent that was Lane's justification. And by the way, he was asked even further and talked about speaking at his dad's funeral. He referenced that again.
When I spoke at my dad's funeral, he moved 17 times. And I realized when all the people, I got all the letters, calls, people showed up from around all those different spots, NC State, all the different spots he coached. And they said he was able to impact them and how much that meant to them. And so I've really strived since that day to really try to impact people and help people through life, through my journey. So just prayed a lot and made a family decision and, hopefully get a chance to go, impact a whole new set of people.
From an LSU perspective, you'd love to hear Lane Kiffin elated about joining LSU and the opportunity. That's not what you got there. But I think that just speaks to how difficult a decision this was, because I do believe Lane Kiffin is sincere and genuine in his love, affection, for admiration for Oxford, for Ole Miss. But professionally, he has goals. His goals are to win national championships. And I don't think he feels like he can do that at Ole Miss. And you're going to say, but they're in the playoff. And that's true. But I think you can also genuinely look at this team and say, it's a very good team. This team isn't going to win a national championship. And certainly you're not capable of competing for and winning multiple national championships over many years and sustaining that, which is ultimately why Lane Kiffin today is in Baton Rouge. And now the challenge becomes for Lane Kiffin to build a staff and a roster capable of winning that national championship. He took some of those first steps on Sunday, which we'll talk about as we continue here. Locked on LSU. It's your team every day. The World Cup is coming back to North America for the first time since 1994. And with 48 teams for the first time ever, it's going to be massive. But let's be honest, getting tickets is usually the hardest part. That's why Game Time is clutch, finally giving fans the real advantage when it comes to snagging seats. With Game Time, you can track prices in real time, get alerts when great seats open, and buy tickets the moment they hit the app. It puts the power back in your hands and makes going to the World Cup realistic instead of impossible. Alerts for teams and matches make it easy to grab tickets for the moment they drop instead of missing out. And prices include fees up front, which I love, so there's no last-second surprises at checkout. So take the guesswork out of buying World Cup tickets and every match, concert, or event with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the app, make an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go, Game Time. So now Lane Kiffin is in Baton Rouge, and as I was told by a member of the committee that greeted Lane Kiffin at the airport, of course, landing in Baton Rouge shortly before 5 p.m. Central Time, I was told by a member of that committee that after all of the meet and greet, the pictures, the first thing Lane Kiffin said to his coaches and his staff is, we have a lot of phone calls to make. Also said that one of the first things was that he was anxious to get to work. So Lane Kiffin and his staff members immediately went to football ops to start getting acquainted with their new digs and also with the staff and starting the process of finishing a recruiting class with signing day on Wednesday. Let's talk about the staff first, and then we'll get into signing day. So here's what we know so far. And by the way, if you're if you're a follower, I'm also the publisher at louisianasports.net, which is a totally free website. You can go check it out. All of this information completely free, no paywall. Here's what we know. So we started with trying to figure out who was on the plane, who got on the plane from Oxford to Baton Rouge. And it's very, very clear that if you got on the plane, you were done at Ole Miss. If you got on the plane, you weren't going back. Billy Glasscock, who was the GM, at Ole Miss, he's joining Lane Kiffin in Baton Rouge. That would, for all intents and purposes, spell the end of Austin Thomas's time in Baton Rouge. And I've given this caveat over and over. I think Austin is super smart, brilliant guy, a good man, husband, father, representative LSU, all that stuff. I think he's very transformative and forward-thinking. But it's Lane Kiffin's right as the coach to bring in whoever he wants. And Austin was a Scott Woodward hire. Scott's gone. Brian Kelly's gone. If Lane Kiffin wants to bring in his GM, Billy Glasscock, that's his right. And Billy Glasscock was on that flight. And it looks like he is, in fact, going to be part of this staff. Nick Savage is the strength and conditioning coordinator, who also was on the flight to Baton Rouge. That would certainly mean that LSU's going to have a new strength and conditioning coordinator in Baton Rouge at LSU. Chris Kiffin, Lane's brother, also who's an analyst at Ole Miss, is expected to join his brother in Baton Rouge. The interesting thing about Chris Kiffin is whether or not he would actually have an on-field role or if he would continue in an analyst or support staff role. But Chris Kiffin is expected to join his brother in Baton Rouge. Now, Charlie Weiss Jr., the offensive coordinator at Ole Miss, did get on the plane to Baton Rouge and join Lane Kiffin. Now, there's been a lot of speculation about Charlie Weiss Jr. potentially returning to Oxford to stay with Ole Miss through the playoff run. Now, that would contradict everything that Lane Kiffin said and that Keith Carter to this point has said, which is if you get on that plane, you're gone. If you're not staying, get on the plane and go. Well, Charlie Weiss Jr., there's video. He got on the plane to Baton Rouge, which tells you that if the opportunity presents, he's joining Lane Kiffin's staff at LSU. But the other thing about Ole Miss is they're preparing for a playoff run, and they don't have much offensive staff. I mean, Lane Kiffin's gone. If Charlie Weiss Jr. joins as well, that's your offensive staff, your primary play callers that are gone. It's also worth noting that Joe Cox, who has the title of co-offensive coordinator at Ole Miss, also was on the plane and in Baton Rouge today. I was able to confirm that from football operations on Sunday. So both Charlie Weiss and Joe Cox were in Baton Rouge with Lane Kiffin, which tells you there ain't nobody to call plays left in Oxford. Now, I get it. That's not LSU's problem, but it will be interesting to see if Charlie Weiss Jr. returns to Oxford, maybe to be the play caller for the playoff. We'll see how this goes. Wide receiver. So that part, I know Charlie Weiss Jr. and Joe Cox were in Baton Rouge on Sunday. I do not know if Weiss is going to return to Ole Miss to coach that team in the playoff. There's also been some talk about Charlie Weiss Jr. being in the mix for the head coaching job at South Florida with Alex Golesh going to Auburn. Wide receiver coach George McDonald also joining Lane Kiffin in Baton Rouge. And then there are several support staff members as well that are worth noting that have been reported. So Matt Zenitz from CBS Sports reported that senior associate AD for football operations Thaddeus Rivers was also on the plane and is joining Lane Kiffin in Baton Rouge. The other two names that are interesting are running backs coach Kevin Smith and offensive line assistant James Craig. Yes, that James Craig. So James Craig was the offensive line coach at LSU for the 2019 national championship team. Now, LSU got popped by the NCAA for recruiting improprieties during the COVID shutdown. Well, James Craig effectively became the fall guy for LSU, and he was fired with cause. James Craig filed a wrongful termination lawsuit against LSU and won. So it's interesting that Craig would be invited back to LSU, but at this point, is that really going to be the thing that you hold Lane Kiffin's feet to the fire about? Remember, Craig was at USC under Kiffin, also with Ed Ogeron. So when Ogeron became the head coach at LSU, he had familiarity with James Craig because of their time together at USC. The other name to keep in mind is Kevin Smith. So Kevin Smith is the running backs coach at Ole Miss, has been with Lane Kiffin during his entire run at FAU, followed Kiffin to Ole Miss, where he's been with him for 6 years. So Kevin Smith has been with Lane Kiffin for nearly a decade now as his running backs coach. And there have been conflicting reports. He was not on the plane to Baton Rouge on Sunday, but there is some thought that Smith is still expected to join Kiffin in Baton Rouge eventually. So a lot of this is Ole Miss has got to keep an offensive staff together for the college football playoff. So what coaching staff members might be retained for the playoff that are eventually going to join Kiffin in Baton Rouge? Don't know, worth playing that out. But the big domino there that would fall is what happens with Frank Wilson. And I don't have that answer now, but I think there is a unanimous agreement among LSU fans and people who know this program well that it would greatly behoove Frank Wilson, or greatly behoove LSU and Lane Kiffin to retain Frank Wilson because of his recruiting prowess, the amount of players on this team that love him, to keep this recruiting class and this roster together. Frank Wilson would be a huge part of that. And then, of course, continuing to recruit the New Orleans area. So as we know more there, we'll tell you defensively, there's a real chance Blake Baker could be retained with, obviously, with Pete Golding being promoted to the head coach at Ole Miss. He's Lane's defensive coordinator in Oxford. So Baker, provided he doesn't get a look as the head coach at Tulane, could very well be back, along with Kevin Peoples, Corey Raymond, Jake Olson. Kyle Williams is interesting because there's been a lot of scuttle about Ed Ogeron potentially joining Lane Kiffin's staff in Baton Rouge, which I assume could happen. But Kyle Williams, what his future is, seems up in the air at this point as well. So that's an early look at the staff. We will take a quick look at some of the roster turnover that we experienced on Sunday here, with a lot of turnover with the regular season ending and a lot of coaching carousel moves spinning. We'll get to that to wrap up Locked on LSU next, your team every day. The holidays always feel a little easier when you already know the perfect gift. And Omaha Steaks makes it almost too simple. Whether you're treating yourself this season or sending memorable memories and gifts to family and friends, Omaha Steaks delivers handcrafted perfection right to their door. And this week is the best time to jump in because their cyber sale is here and the deals are huge. The quality is exactly what you hope for. Incredibly tender steaks, rich flavor, and meals that make hosting or weeknight cooking easier. And the variety is underrated. Steaks, burgers, comfort meals, sides, desserts. It's one of those gifts that truly fits anyone. So save big on unforgettable gifts with Omaha Steaks. Visit omahasteaks.com for 50% off site-wide and an extra 20% off select favorites during their cyber sale. And for an additional $35 off, use promo code COLLEGE at checkout. That's omahasteaks.com, promo code COLLEGE. Terms apply. See site for details. Finally, the roster for 2026 and beyond for LSU is already starting to shape up. Now, LSU receiver Kylan Billiot has announced his intention to enter the transfer portal. Now, remember, the portal doesn't open until the beginning of January 2nd. So you can't formally enter the portal yet, but certainly you can declare your intention to do so. And so many of these deals now are done through agents and third parties that by the time the portal opens, deals are already done for players to land wherever it is they're going to land. Recruiting was interesting on Sunday as well. Maybe the most consequential name is Brayden Allen. Now, Brayden Allen is a 4-star wide receiver from Lafayette, 6'1", 185. He committed to Oklahoma back in October, and he's got 22 offers. This is a big-time receiver prospect from Lafayette committed to Oklahoma. Well, it was thought that he might flip to LSU. He enters the transfer portal on Sunday. He decommits from Oklahoma on Sunday. And our buddy Shea Dixon from On3 immediately put in his prediction for Allen to ultimately land at LSU with new coach Lane Kiffin. In addition, there are 3 Ole Miss commitments that decommitted on Sunday. Safety Trey Collins decommitted. He's out of Richland, Mississippi, decommitted. 2027 interior offensive lineman Chavez Dixon decommitted from Ole Miss. 6'4", 325-pounder, had been committed since September. And then 4-star wideout Corey Barber decommitted from Ole Miss. He's out of Pinson, Alabama, had been committed since May. He was the second highest ranked recruit in the Rebels 2026 class. So you're talking about right now 3 Ole Miss commits that have already decommitted from the class and an Oklahoma commit that decommitted that is very likely now to land in the LSU class. Also, great news for LSU. The 2 highest rated commits for LSU in their 2026 class, Lamar Brown out of U High, Richard Anderson out of Edna Karr in New Orleans, both shut down their recruitment, affirming their commitment to LSU. So all of the response in the early going here about Lane Kiffin's hiring at LSU, overwhelmingly positive. In this week, finishing the staff and the signing period beginning on Wednesday will be massive for 2026 and the LSU Tigers. We'll be here talking about it every single day. So if you're on podcast, please subscribe. If you're on YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe on your YouTube channel as well. And let a friend know that if they love the Tigers, we got you here every single day for Locked on LSU. It's Kiffin era time, your team every day.